Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. So to address the elephant in the room, having spent a fair amount of time in an orthopedist office this week, I have an official diagnosis of, so it's really helpful. I see a foot and ankle specialist in the morning who I hope will be a miracle worker. And I welcome your prayers in that regard. In a momentous vote by this congregation's members, we set ourselves on a new course, defined by a vision of spiritual, societal, and environmental transformation, not as separate, but as intersecting, overlapping, entwined activities. Today, as we explore the environmental justice movement, we do so because we believe that the work of environmental justice is spiritual work and is the work of transforming our society. True environmental justice work is less likely to evoke images of remote hiking trails in carefully preserved national parks, and more apt to prompt images of inner city challenges and toxic waste facilities hidden away in rural communities. True environmental justice work agrees that the extinction of certain species is a catastrophic concern, while also asserting that Black and brown lives matter too. We're here today not simply to wring our hands, or especially in this setting, to generate particular actions, to address the frequently asked question, but what should we do? We're here to listen, to open our minds and our hearts. I'm glad you're here, whether you are a visitor or a member of this congregation. as we prepare to sing a brand new song. It's equally unfamiliar to all of us. You're not alone. None of us know what we're doing. As we prepare to sing, greet someone around you who you don't know.
The sweet water, the bright air, and the good earth we cherish to all of our neighbors, however far away they live.
Delegates to the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, held on October 24th to the 27th, 1991, in Washington, D.C. Drafted and adopted 17 principles of environmental justice. Since then, the principles have served as a kind of defining document for the growing grassroots movement for environmental justice. They write, "We, the people of color, gathered together at this multinational People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice.
Environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction.
Environmental justice demands that public policy be based on mutual respect and justice for all peoples, free from any form of discrimination or bias.
Environmental justice mandates the right to ethical, balanced, and responsible uses of land and renewable resources in the interest of a sustainable planet for humans and other living things.
Environmental justice calls for universal protection from nuclear testing, extraction, production, and disposal of toxic hazardous wastes and poisons, and nuclear testing that threaten the fundamental right to clean air, land, water, and food.
Environmental justice affirms the fundamental right to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination of all peoples.
Environmental justice demands the cessation of the production of all toxins. Imagine the cessation of the production of all toxins, hazardous wastes, and radioactive materials, and that all past and current producers, very relevant in the state of North Carolina right now, all past and current producers be held strictly accountable to the people for detoxification and the containment at the point of production.
Environmental justice demands the right to participate as equal partners at every level of decision-making, including needs assessment, planning, implementation, enforcement, and evaluation.
Environmental justice affirms the right of all workers to a safe and healthy work environment without being forced to choose between an unsafe livelihood and unemployment. It also affirms the right of those who work at home to be free from environmental hazards.
Environmental justice protects the right of victims of environmental injustice to receive full compensation and reparations for damages, as well as quality health care.
The principles continue. Environmental justice considers governmental acts of environmental injustice a violation of the international law, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and the United Nations Convention on Genocide.
Environmental justice must recognize a special legal and natural relationship of Native peoples to the U.S. government through treaties, agreements, compacts, and covenants affirming sovereignty and self-determination.
Environmental justice affirms the need for urban and rural ecological policies to clean up and rebuild our cities and rural areas in balance with nature, honoring the cultural integrity of all of our communities, providing fair access for all to the full range of resources.
Environmental justice calls for the strict enforcement of principles of informed consent and a halt to the testing of experimental reproductive and medical procedures and vaccinations on people of color.
Environmental justice opposes the destructive operations of multinational corporations.
Environmental justice opposes military occupation, repression, and exploitation of lands, peoples, and cultures, and other life forms.
Environmental justice calls for the education of present and future generations, which emphasizes social and environmental issues based on our experience and an appreciation of our diverse cultural perspectives.
Environmental justice requires that we, as individuals, make personal and consumer choices to consume as little of Mother Earth's resources and to produce as little waste as possible, and make the conscious decision to challenge and reprioritize our lifestyles to ensure the health of the natural world for present and future generations.
I just read Beverly Goligorsky's heartbreaking new novel, Every Body Has a Story. It's a poignant account of the lives of two couples, Dory and Stu, and Lena and Zach, along with Lena and Zach's kids, Rosie and Casey. Friends since their younger, wilder days, the four are navigating a tenuous, tentative course away from their childhood experiences of intense poverty and instability. This compelling novel is about many things: love lost and found, friendship and family, honesty and betrayal, all set against the backdrop of the cruel vulnerabilities of poverty. It is as much as anything about home, about place, about being settled and unsettled and resettled. Both Dorian, Stu, and Lena and Zach have managed to buy their own modest homes and are quite proud of their places. More than proud, they are defined by these houses. They are home owners in control of their fate until one evening Zach seems more distant, disconnected. Late into the night, Lena confronts Zach. What's going on? With a blank, vacant stare, he responds, this is not our house. Of course it is. We no longer own this house. We've been officially foreclosed. We'll be evicted in 30 days if we don't make plans to move out. They, whoever they really are taking away our home. Their lives start to unravel. This house is not just a house, it's who they are, it's what holds them together. Lena recalls when they first moved in, they bought a kitchen set and lamps. The children investigated each new item as if it were a toy or a Christmas decoration. Gossip, arguments, laughter, tears, plans, and so much else went on in this room. If walls could talk, she remembers Zach striding through this house like the lord of the manor. And the children, unused to sleeping in their separate rooms, visiting each other nightly. And now they are losing it all. Many of us here today have some understanding of that experience. Some of us here have lived on the cusp of poverty, hoping one day to have a house of our own. Some of us have faced some reality, health, age, a transfer, finances, loss, that forced us to give up a house we truly loved. Some of us have gone through this with our parents or grandparents or friends. Houses occupy a special place in our memories, hearts, experience, our energy. Think briefly about some house that's particularly special to you, and about the feelings that are invoked when you picture that special house. The ancient Greek word for house was oikos, O-I-K-O-S. True to our experience, this word, oikos, referred to different but related things. Oikos could mean a family, the family's property, or the house itself. As such, oikos was both a house and a household, a structure and a way of speaking of a group of people who were connected in a deep way because of it. I'd suggest today that there's some connection between the deep emotions that we associate with particular houses and the feelings we get when we see those spectacular images of our planetary home from space. It's what singer-songwriter Peter Mayer was writing about in that song we love to sing here. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. There's some sense of recognition, or is it even belonging? Something that tugs at us when we see our global house whirling its way through a darkened cosmos. Ernest Haeckel was a 19th and early 20th century German scientist, a zoologist, a naturalist, and a marine biologist, among other things. Haeckel is credited with discovering, describing, and naming thousands of new species. He's also credited with coining many new terms in biology, including the term ecology. He based the new term ecology on the Greek word oikos. Haeckel's oikology refers to organisms and their houses, their environments, and ultimately, of course, to all organisms and the entire environment. Taken both literally and as Haeckel was imagining it, ecology was about the house in which we all live, our shared house, which is the entire environmental order of things. It's just one way we might think about this notion of environmental justice. Environmental justice has to do with the presence of, or the absence of, justice in the house, in the oikos, the environment that we all share. Now, scientist Ernest Haeckel had his own notions about the proper ordering of things. It was a regrettably common notion amongst the scientists of his time. He explained the Caucasian or Mediterranean man has from time immemorial been placed at the head of the races of all men as the most highly developed and perfect. It's a stark reminder. Science often upheld white supremacy. Affirming along with Haeckel, as he put it, that Negroes were savages and that whites were the most civilized. Notice, the very scientists so interested in species of all kinds, the very scientists who literally gave us the notion of ecology, the very scientists who wrote of our shared environment as a house, had an explicitly white supremacist ideology. Quite unlike the environmental movement, recognizing that ideology and its detrimental consequences for our house has been a driving force for the environmental justice movement. Liberation theologian James Cone, in his important article, Whose Earth Is It Anyway? Whose Earth Is It Anyway? Wrote, racial and economic justice has been, at best, only a marginal concern in the mainstream environmental movement. White people care more about the endangered whale and the spotted owl than they do about the survival of young blacks in our nation's cities, Cone writes, is a well-founded belief in the African American community. Justice fighters for blacks and defenders of the earth have tended to ignore each other in their public discourse and in their practice. And, assesses Cone, their separation from each other is unfortunate because they're fighting the same enemy. Human beings' domination of each other and nature. Now think for a moment about your residence, where you currently reside. Now imagine that certain people, without your input, are doing things that mean simply by breathing the air where you live, you'll now be more susceptible to asthma, cardiovascular issues, lung disease, and cancer. Or let's say you get a notice tomorrow that unbeknownst to you, there's going to be a new landfill or a hazardous waste site or some industrial facility nearby. Or let's say you become aware that an upcoming time of flooding is going to be much more serious for you because other people have made choices that make them far less vulnerable. How would you feel? And what would you do? The fact is, this is true. All of this, toxic air, hazardous waste, disastrous flooding, is happening in our house, our shared planetary home right now. But the consequences aren't spread equally. The deleterious impact of it all doesn't affect us the same. Some of us are going to pay a higher price for all of this. And studies for decades have clearly shown that. It's the ones of us who are already marginalized, the ones who are already marginalized, who will pick up the tab for the rest of us. The Yale University study of air pollutants that have been connected to asthma, cardiovascular issues, lung disease, and cancer, found that black and brown people suffer far, far higher exposure than whites. Landfills, hazardous waste sites, and other industrial facilities are most often located in communities of color. A report titled Toxic Waste and Race at 20 found that more than half of the people who live less than 2 miles from a toxic waste facility in the United States are people of color. A report by the Center for Effective Government found that people of color are nearly twice as likely as white residents to live close to an industrial facility. Lead poisoning disappropriately affects children of color, with children of color living in urban areas at the highest risk for poisoning by lead-based paint. Lead poisoning can result in things like anemia, seizures, and brain development issues. Communities living below the poverty line have a 35% higher burden from particulate matter emissions. African Americans specifically had a 54% higher burden than the overall population. When environmental disaster strikes, flooding or fires, as we've seen in New Orleans, the New York area, Houston, California, poor people and people of color fare far worse than people with means and white people. It's these kind of awareness that prompt the movement known as environmental justice. This movement is trying desperately to get our attention. Environmental justice wants us to pay attention to the fact that right here in our house, there's devastation going on of our own making. Environmental justice wants us to notice that we've created a system, nationally and globally, rooted in a white supremacist ideology. An ideology that finds it acceptable to damage further those who are already the most marginalized. Those deeply devoted to environmental justice may also love what we here often call nature. They too may enjoy places of beauty and serenity, far removed from lead paint, particulate matter, and toxic waste sites. They too may enjoy seaside sunrises, remote hikes, mountaintop scenery, and lovely gardens aglow with color. But their request, their increasingly energized, strident request is this: please, when you hear the environmental part, don't just think about those places. Think about the inner city festering with toxic air, and about rural communities burdened with bubbling ponds of coal ash. Let your environmental concerns include the people who our capitalist system seeks daily to erase and ignore. When you hear about the calamitous consequences of global climate change, when you hear about the derision for green energy plans, deemed outrageously unrealistic, think about what that means for those who are impoverished, or who have been told in so many other ways that their lives don't really matter. We wonder, what can we do? Isn't this just another one of those overwhelming problems with no actual way for any of us to make a difference? Here, at least, is a start. Just notice. Just pay attention. We live in a system that is designed, that is determined to distract us. Noticing and paying attention to these things, knowing about them, learning them, are themselves subversive acts. Then, when certain plans are being put forth and other proposals are being panned, we might ask, how does this affect the most marginalized? Can you imagine leading with that question in the political arena in this city? How does what you are proposing affect the most marginalized? How does this affect the balance of power, resources, influence, safety, health, well-being? Does the plan let our current raging inequities go unchecked? Does the proposal take marginalized people and their perspectives into account? Does a suggested solution assure the continuance of capitalism's greedy grab? Or does it offer some check on the unfettered demand for more and more and more? Scientist Ernst Haeckel's white supremacist ideology was abhorrent. Nonetheless, his notion of oikology, or ecology, was helpful. It's about the oikos. It's about this shared planetary house, home, and about the family of all living things who are a part of the only oikos that there is. Whose house? Our house. Whose house? Our house.
Welcome. We're happy you're with us today in this room or joining us remotely. We're pleased to have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you personally following the service, so if you're visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, please take note of guests seated near you. After the service, invite them for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. Also, an elevator is located to the left of the entrance. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place it in an offering basket later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. The cards and offering envelopes are on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing those now. Visitors interested in hearing about how to become a member can talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. And again, to each of you, welcome. I'm Janann Jones. I've been a member of this church for over 10 years. Last year, I applied to and was then invited to join the Environmental Justice Core Group. We met once a month to read and learn. When we started meeting, I was completely unfamiliar with the concept of environmental justice. And I was not a particularly consistent environmentalist. It is true that I refuse to water a lawn or to apply broadleaf herbicide, but that is about the end of my hardcore environmentalism. So why then would I wish to be part of this core group? Well, the short answer is that during a very tense time in our nation's history, I felt desperate. I felt desperate to become a more useful human being. Emphasis on human. Now, I had originally applied to the racial justice group because I was all wound up about the problems of humans. When I was invited to the environmental justice group instead, I was hesitant. But I'm a human pleaser, so I said yes. And then I went to this meeting. A fictionalized account of our first environmental justice meeting follows. So there I was at the first meeting in the Bernstein room, feeling like a fraud, sitting among real environmentalists. And we began to discuss. And at that point, I realized, environmental justice isn't about people saving the planet, it's about people saving people. Saving those people from a poisoned planet, a planet that was poisoned by much more powerful people. So obviously there is overlap between the goals of environmental justice and the goals of environmentalists. But people are the point of environmental justice. People saving the lives, the health, the homes of people. And that is the end of my fictionalized account. The actual meeting was much longer and more confusing to me. Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, writes, "If the nation is to achieve environmental justice, the environment in urban ghettos, barrios, reservations, and rural poverty pockets must be given the same protection as that provided to the suburbs." I appreciate the clarity of Robert Bullard's statement. Of course, the real-world application of truly equal environmental protections will be tricky, even with good faith actors. when I think about it, I mean, how does one site a landfill so that its neighbors are as protected as a community miles away? Maybe we could pollute both communities equally. Maybe we can issue permits for industrial-sized hog farms in Ritzieville, and then we can put the landfill in Flat Brooksburg. That way, everyone enjoys the nasty smells and the polluted water and the increased truck traffic and a legitimate excuse to complain. I'm not certain that seagulls hang out at hog farms like they do at dumps, but I have seen vultures near a pigsty, and I have seen geese dumpster diving. So you know, the landfill and the hog farms will be good for wildlife. Birds. It's a win for the environment. After my year of learning about environmental justice, I personally have taken a few small steps towards utility. Most frequently, I read news stories differently. I used to lump the varieties of injustice into one overwhelming category. And with so much unfairness in the world, how could I ever hope to make a difference? Environmental justice issues are often intensely local, which gives us an opportunity to act locally. Charlotte has its share, so the next time I notice a local issue, I will keep an eye on it. It might be a threat to me, whether I live in Ritzieville or Flat Brooksburg, but it might be a threat to somebody on the other side of town, and we both deserve better.
Thank you, Janan, both for your personal reflection and for your welcome. Our worship team is actually the one who has created and edited and re-edited and edited again the welcome script that you hear every week. And those of you who hear it every week may begin to forget that it's not for you, right? It's for the visitors. It's so that they can get to know us. I'm grateful for representation from our disabilities affinity group. We pointed out how important it is for us to note our provision of a large print order of service, of hearing assistance devices, and more recently of the elevator. I'll admit I may be just a little bit hazy today. I could have sworn I heard you say there's an alligator located at the left of the doors. And I thought, on a day when we're thinking about the planet and all creatures, something to be concerned about if there is, in fact, an alligator located at the left of the doors. On the off chance that she's right, I'm going to invite some of the rest of you to exit first today. One of the principles of environmental justice that we shared with you says this: environmental justice requires that we as individuals make personal and consumer choices to consume as little of Mother Earth's resources and to produce as little waste as possible, and make the conscious decision to challenge and prioritize our lifestyles to ensure the health of the natural world for present and future generations. So you're here today you're upset about this topic, you're wondering why we're not offering something more hopeful. So here's a channel for your outrage, for your exasperation, for your feeling of powerlessness. We've just launched this month our Greening Our Facility Capital campaign, because we recognize that how we live our lives from within these walls has a bearing on the message we're able to carry out beyond them. It says this directly in the end statements developed by our board. So greening our facility is not unrelated to environmental justice. In fact, it's completely in sync with one of the principles of environmental justice. There's a table in Freeman Hall. Take your outrage and your longing to do something and visit the table today with a very generous commitment to our Greening Our Facility capital campaign. Our racial justice engagement group has identified our initial partners in our work as accomplices in the larger community. And tomorrow evening, we'll have an opportunity to meet the second of these partners, especially if you're interested in how we will continue our commitment to the work of affordable housing, or if you've already signed up to be a part of our rapid response group when called by our partners. I commend tomorrow evening's discussion. It will be with Robert Dawkins from the Housing Justice Coalition and with our own member, Mike O'Sullivan, who has been exemplary in his devotion to these issues. They'll share with us about the work of our new partner, the Housing Justice Coalition. It's tomorrow evening. It's at 6:30. It will be here in the sanctuary. Please come and bring your neighbors. This week includes yet another family ministry opportunity on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Sorry, Eve. Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. That's the part she wants emphasized. And also our annual member-led Seder on Saturday at 5 p.m. You can sign up to be a part of the Seder at the adult programming table in Freeman Hall. We gather each week in part to hold both cause for celebration and for concern. Today, it seems imperative to me that we pause in utter awe and wonder at a remarkable sight this past week. Due to astounding scientific ingenuity, we are the first people ever to get a telescopic image of a black hole. How can we not but celebrate the scientific discipline and imagination that gave us this awesome gift this week? If you heard the press conference from Washington, D.C., with one of the lead scientists, he equated it to standing in Washington and reading the date off a quarter in Los Angeles. Such a remarkable event. I found it utterly awe-inspiring. We also celebrate with anxious concern the way protest, people ask, what's protest do? The way protest and the sheer voice of the people has fostered change in Algeria and in Sudan. Having just read Sudanese writer Layla Abu Layla's beautiful collection of short stories, Elsewhere Home, I was heartened to hear of change there, aware, of course, that the road to true transformation remains extremely challenging. We hold with concern on this day our planet, but especially this day, the marginalized in our country and around the world now bearing the brunt of systemic decisions that make their lives so much more vulnerable. Closer to home, we hold deep in our prayers Dick, Simone, and Suzanne Lake. Dick, our dear member of decades, faces considerable health challenges. We also hold our members Judy Calabrese and Donald Freund in our prayers as they recover from health challenges. The candles before you, if today marks some special celebration or concern in your life, a memory, you're invited, visitor, member alike, to come forward and light a candle in silence later in the service when the music is played and the offering baskets are being passed. For now, another great gift from this incredibly gifted congregation, a remarkably beautiful piece arranged by our member, Paul Wilson. Thank you all.
Wake now my senses and hear the
Please join me in a time of meditation and aspiration. Our planet, our neighbors, our faith, all that we hold most dear, all that we trust most deeply, and to which we entrust ourselves most deeply. This all conspires in a common call. Awake, wake now. The earth is calling, the web of creation is calling, reason is calling, the beauty and wisdom of time are calling. Wake now. Compassion is calling, strangers and friends are calling, justice is calling, God's love is calling. Wake now. And yet a whole global system conspires to anesthetize us, to seduce us into complacent slumber, to distract us, to entice us into imagining that it will forever be possible to have more and more and more. With subtle, often gentle messages, these invite, don't notice. Don't pay attention. Don't worry. Don't feel responsible. It will cost us if we wake up. It will disturb and upset us if we wake up. It will expand our comfort zones and maybe even change our lives if we heed this call to be among the woke, the aware. May we take that risk, awaken to a vision of ever greater clarity, awaken to a new pathway bright with radiance, awaken to a calling as accomplices with those able to lead. Wake. Wake now. Wake.
We will now give and receive the offering. Your giraffes light our sanctuary and fuel our programs. Your generosity lights our sanctuary and fuels our programs. Please join me in an affirmation of our faith, rising in body and or spirit. Alice Walker writes, "Spirit, the grandmother spirit of the earth, sent me this chant." Let us together chant this blessing 7 times. 7 is the ideal number of people in a circle that is designed to grow the soul and change the world. 1 earth,
1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love. 1 earth, 1 people, 1 love.
Camille Dungy, the powerful contemporary U.S. poet, in words that appear on the front of your order, writes in the introduction to her significant collection about eco-justice poetry, "True justice implies fair treatment toward survival, and one's position in the world is perilous if one is not allowed to survive in one's own house." Please be seated.